following is an excerpt of a recent MORTradio broadcast. And since I've been ranting and raving about how much of a noob I am when I'm playing the Star Wars Battlefront game, because I'm really bad at the game, but since I was talking about Star Wars, I might as well bring up the medical examiner's report regarding the death of Carrie Fisher. As everyone knows, that Carrie Fisher, a couple days before Christmas last year, Carrie Fisher was coming home from London on the airplane, and just prior to landing, stopped breathing and pretty much had a heart attack. It started vomiting and became unresponsive. They took her to the hospital, and where she later died a few days later. Well, the coroner released their findings, which state that Carrie Fisher died of sleep apnea, which is basically the medical explanation for when someone stops breathing, why they sleep. But what was even more surprising, or I shouldn't say surprising, maybe just shocking, was that Carrie Fisher had this cocktail of drugs in her system. That they found that Carrie Fisher had cocaine, had heroin, and ecstasy in her system at the time of her death. That although they could not honestly say if the drug use contributed to her death, it nonetheless was there, and it wasn't in a light amount. She had taken these drugs at least 72 hours prior to her death, all these drugs. And yeah, it's a little bit surprising because although she spoke very, very openly about her drug use, she also said that she had been sober, and that she had gone through treatments, that she dealt with her bipolarism with electroshock treatments, ECTs, and everything from that to having a support dog. So, yeah, it was a little surprising to find out that this woman at 60 years old was still doing these hardcore drugs. This isn't someone who was smoking pot. She, had aches and pains from getting older, and so once in a while, she lit up a joint and just to relax. Okay. No, she was doing these hardcore drugs. She was snorting heroin. She was snorting cocaine. She was taking ecstasy. I mean, that's pretty hardcore. But I guess why I would have any kind of comment on this was it's another example about this outlook people have about celebrities, that celebrities can do no wrong, that even when they're open, and I will give Carrie Fisher this, she was very open about her shortcomings, her drug addictions, her, as she would put it, her mental illness by being bipolar. She was very open about it, and when people would come up to her and say that she was their role model, she would always tell them, well, I'm sorry, because she knew she wasn't probably the best role model in the world. And when people used her as a role model, believe me, they weren't using Carrie Fisher as a role model. They had this image of Princess Leia, which is what Carrie Fisher's more or less remembered for. She did a lot of work. I know she wrote, and she had a bestseller, and she did other roles in films, but Carrie Fisher is remembered for Princess Leia. Her fame comes from Princess Leia. So that's what they say. That's what they're referring to, the general public or people who are fans of Carrie Fisher. That's what they're referring to when they say, well, Carrie Fisher's a role model to me. They're looking at the Carrie Fisher of Princess Leia. But anyway, seeing that the results of the medical examiner that Carrie Fisher was doing these hardcore drugs literally just a day or two prior, if not the day of her heart attack or her sleep apnea attack, which led to her death, just goes to show you again that celebrities, a lot of them, are really just really unbalanced in ways, really have these deep set flaws in their characters, and that they're put on these pedestals as these great thinkers, as these creative geniuses, and they're really flawed. And yet people look up to them and give them such leeway with their indiscretions, with their shortcomings. They can do, as the saying goes, they can do no wrong, or almost most of them can do no wrong. Even after her death, when the family requested, according to the interview with the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, when the family requested that there would be no autopsy done, that they did not want Carrie Fisher dissected in a general autopsy, which happens numerous times a day, the Los Angeles Medical Examiner honored that request. And I'll tell you, again, as a mortician, that's a rarity. I've known many families who have requested that an autopsy not be done on their loved one. You know, grandma dies in her sleep, and she had no doctor caring for her, and no doctor would sign a death certificate, so she had to go to the medical examiners, and they just posted her, or performed an autopsy on her. And the family would request, well, there's no reason to. She's 92 years old. Could you not do this? And the coroner's like, nope. And they did it. I think they honored the request not so much because they thought it wasn't necessary. I think they honored the request because Carrie Fisher's a celebrity, much like they honor a lot of requests for celebrities. And it was just another example of a celebrity getting a pass. Now, again, Carrie Fisher did do good work. I'm not saying she didn't have any bright moments in her life, and I'm not saying that she should be cast aside. What I am saying is, let's look at the reality of the situation. If your next door neighbor was a drug addict, if your next door neighbor did coke and heroin and ecstasy and was a crackhead or what have you, I mean, would you give her the time of day? Would you sit there and have discussions about this, discussions in social commentary or the political spectrum of our country, or what her opinion was regarding the president or any other issue? No, you wouldn't. To say that you would, you'd be lying to yourself and to anyone who's listening to you. If your neighbor, the drug addict, started to spout off about what she thinks is wrong with the country, you tell her to shut the fuck up, and you'd go back inside your house. You'd tell her to stay off your lawn, keep quiet, or I'll call the cops. That's what you would do. But Carrie Fisher, we again say, well, she was giving a lot of shit to Trump. She was putting Trump in his place. She was putting the Tea Party in their place. Now, I don't care whether or not if you like Donald Trump or the Tea Party, it doesn't matter to me. But I'm just saying that if you're going to be critical of people, you got to first evaluate yourself. And how can you be critical of a person if you can't even control your own life? If you can't even maintain your life your lifestyle, that you're unable to conduct day-to-day activities without medication or support animals or electric shock therapy or drug use. Because let me tell you something about drug addicts. Drug addicts and anyone who's had a family member who's had a hardcore drug addict in their family, and I have, let me tell you one thing about drug addicts. Those people will say whatever you want to hear to get you off their back, to get you to leave them alone. They will tell you that they have all these mental health issues. They will tell you that they were raped by whoever. They will tell you they were abused by whoever. And for all these reasons, that's why they take drugs. That's why they self-medicate, because they can't cope. And then when you say, I feel sorry for you, I understand, let's get you some help, they're like, okay, sure, thanks. And then they're like, get the fuck out of my way, I need to get high. That's how they are. And frankly, and I'm not speaking about Carrie Fisher as a person being a horrible person. I'm just saying she really was no different. She would say whatever she needed to do to whatever person, and then she'd go about and do her thing and take her drugs and get high because she liked to get high. It wasn't her way of, I got to cope with my mental illness, so I need to snort heroin. No, she liked to get high. She liked the feeling. She liked what it did to her. And therefore she did it. And she would tell you anything you wanted to hear to get you to go away so she can go back to doing her thing. Because the only difference between that neighbor who's a drug addict that you just told to get the hell out and to keep quiet, and if you get on my front lawn again, I'm going to call the cops. The only difference between that drug addict and Carrie Fisher is that Carrie Fisher had the money, the means, to buy her supplies. She didn't have to sell herself on the street or break into your house and steal your shit and pawn it off so she can buy drugs. She had more than enough money through her family and through her creative works to buy her own supply. And that's really the only difference. That's really the only difference. She was able to buy her own drugs. Other than that, she was no different than the crackhead that's in some trailer park or whatever heroin addict looking for their next fix and doing whatever they can to get it. Other than her ability to buy her own junk, she was no different. So I'm not saying to judge her as a person, because as a person, Carrie Fisher was really no different than any of us. She had her flaws. She had her demons. And unfortunately, she could not overcome them. She did not have the strength or the willpower to go about her life without leaning on something. And eventually, and leaning on, obviously, drugs. And eventually, her drug use, coupled with some other probably unhealthy lifestyle choices, led to her death. I guess my critique comes from this putting her, or any celebrity, putting her on this pedestal and putting the label on her saying role model. Because really, would you want to have any drug addict as your role model? Yeah, I understand the recovering drug addict. Well, they were once this hardcore drug addict, but they became clean and sober, built their life back up, and now are these leaders of society, and they're doing well. Okay, if you want to have that as a role model, be my guest, that's fine. You know, if they've cleaned their life up, you know, I understand that. But obviously, Carrie Fisher didn't do that. Obviously, Carrie Fisher until her dying day was still doing her drugs and living the lifestyle that we would not condone if it was anyone else. So putting her or any celebrity up on this pedestal and saying, because you're a celebrity, because you're a movie star, because you're this creative genius or supposedly some creative genius, you therefore have this higher intelligence, and everything you say is like this seed of knowledge where only everything grows, and it's nonsense. If you are looking for a role model or a hero, someone to look up to, why don't you look at the person, man or woman, why don't you look at the person who gets up every day and goes about their business. They go to work, they pay their bills, they pay their mortgages, they take care of their children, and they have their highs and lows. They have their moments of depression. They have their moments where they lose faith in themselves and wonder if they are worth anything. And then they get up again and go to work and pay their bills and mortgages and continue raising their children. And they never once resort to taking drugs, self-medicating, crying about manic depressive disorders or bipolarism or needing help or treatment. They just simply continue to live, and they continue to try to be the best person possible. How about looking to them as role models? How about dimming your lights on Broadway for them? They did it for Carrie Fisher and her mother, Debbie Reynolds. They had these moving tributes. Hollywood did, because Hollywood takes care of their own. They had these moving tributes to the memory, and I understand that. They're allowed to, but come on. If you want to have a tribute to a role model or a hero, why don't you have one for those kind of people? The people that get up, the average Joes that get up every fucking day and keep going even when they don't think there's a reason to. Because that's the role model. That's the hero. Not the celebrity. Because no one suffers like the middle class. No one suffers like the middle class. Your celebrities, they're not the role models. They're not the heroes that you think they are. They're in their own clique. They're in their own clan. And frankly, I don't think they give much of a shit about any of us that are not part of their clique and their clan. So yeah, I feel bad that Carrie Fisher has passed on, but I think it was to be expected. Obviously, she knew it was coming. I think she had a few interviews where she knew that her lifestyle choices would eventually be the end of her. So as a person, when Carrie Fisher passed away, her family obviously deserves condolences. But as Carrie Fisher, the role model, she didn't deserve that title. She never did. And I think she was the first one that would ever say that. I'm just echoing what she has already said.